afternoon or good evening, and welcome everyone to this wonderful occasion of celebration. It might be rainy and gloomy outside, but it really is quite nice and bright and light in here, with full of energy from all of the good thoughts and inspiration that you're bringing. Now do me a favor. Turn to the person next to you and just say hello, especially if you don't know them, if you're meeting them for the first time.
Hello.
Engage.
Hello again. Yes.
So my role tonight is basically to welcome you to this event and to provide some context. Okay.
Meet and greet minute.
I'd like to do so actually by sharing with you a poem that my mom taught me when I was a young person, and it really does shed some light and provide a context for much of our discussion tonight. It's titled, "It Couldn't Be Done" by Edgar Guess. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he, with a chuckle, replied that maybe it couldn't, but they would be one who wouldn't say so till they tried. So they buckled right in with a trace of a grin on their face. And if they worried, they hid it. They started to sing as they tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and they did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one ever has done it." But they took off their coats, they took off their pumps, and the first thing we knew, they'd begun it. With a lift of the chin and a glint in their eyes, without any doubting or quit it, they started to sing as they tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and they did it. Now, this poem speaks directly to the perseverance that our UO Black Student Task Force demonstrated on campus back in November 2015, when they issued a series of demands to our campus. The original members of the task force were Kenna Gamala, Shanice Curry, Diamante Jameson, Deja Curry, Denisa Clayton, Alexis White, Derek Bynes, and Ashley Campbell. And as students moved on to other pursuits and graduated, the Black Student Task Force reached out and invited Brianna Hayes, a panelist on tonight's Hannah, Christopher Haywood, Joel Mbala, and Drake Hill to join, and the group continues to grow. Welcome. Please come on and have a seat. Come on. There are plenty of seats in the front.
And there's brownies in the back.
Many of us in this room are privileged to work and learn from the members of the Black Student Task Force. And with the work and foresight that these students have helped us to do, we've addressed several aspects of anti-Black racism on campus, and we're moving forward to make the UO a more equitable and welcoming place for all of our students, as well as our faculty, staff, and visitors. Now, while the process of renaming Dunn to Unthank Hall went through many iterations, the students were the heart and the catalyst of this work, and there is much that we can learn from them and how we can best respond to student concerns. It is true, a symbolic and actual transformation of our campus when we were moving from honoring Frederick Dunn, a deceased faculty member who was an exalted cyclops of the KKK, to now honoring the Norval Unthank Jr., whose outstanding architecture has not only graced this campus, but across the state of Oregon. Now, while members of the Black Student Task Force are working to document the history of their work on campus, some of which we will be featured as part of the interpretive exhibit in the Unthank Hall, tonight's focus is on one of a more discrete issue. Tonight, we have an opportunity to learn more about the renaming process, and we are thankful to members of the committee and all of the folks on campus and in the community who helped with this process. President Schill will speak more to these issues in tonight's format before our panel begins, and he will also be moderating the discussion. We are all privileged to have worked with him on these essential matters of our university, and we introduce him this evening. President Schill stated in a letter to the campus community regarding moving forward on the concerns of the Black Student Task Force that, and I quote, "One of the hallmarks of a great university is that it does not shy away from the tough questions or difficult topics," end quote. President Schill went on to positively address some of these difficult topics by not only helping to move along the renaming of Dunn to Unthank Hall, but also by helping to initiate 13 working groups to address student demands and supporting the creation of the African American Workshop and Lecture Series, now in its second year, the Umajo Academic Residential Center, an African American Opportunities Program, and accelerating efforts to recruit African American students and the hiring of African American faculty members. We are thankful for his continuing support with these and other issues of equity and inclusion on our campus, and for his commitment, and in these words, to seek a diverse perspective, to demand equity, and to foster inclusion. Please help me to welcome him as he leads us into tonight's discussion.
Thank you. Everybody, come on in, have a seat, and grab some food, and why don't we just give you a chance to sit down. There's plenty of seats over in this corner and then in the middle. I just want to welcome all of you to this panel discussion about the renaming of Dunn Hall to Unthank Hall. It was, I think, October 2 years ago when the Black Student Task Force had their initial protest. And one of the things that I've learned here, so I'd been a dean for 12 years in 2 different schools, and I had never experienced a protest in my life. And so that was a first for me. And so I said, they're protesting, what do we do? And so I said, well, I'll just go out and listen. So I went out and listened, and from that day forward, we developed a relationship, I think, of trust and working together that ended up with a significant amount of progress. The renaming of Dunn Hall is one example of that. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll move to the panel. I'm really thrilled today for what I hope will be an interesting, educational, and engaging discussion about our past and our future. The reason I wanted to host this event is because the whole renaming conversation, from the demands of the Black Student Task Force, the research of our history, the campus discussion that took place, the selection of a name, that was all about what we should be doing at a great university. It was about learning. It was about talking. It was about changing views, right? It was about growing in various ways, and as much for me as it was for the students. And I really am very, very grateful for that opportunity. It was also coming to grip with our history, which is a task that we're seeing many universities, many institutions around the United States dealing with right now. And I just got back to town literally about 3 hours ago and picked up the Daily Emerald. And what do I see in there? Another building with the possible naming issue. So these are not just isolated issues. These are issues that are systemic, and in many ways, the past 2 years has been a model that we can follow, but also other schools have followed. I frequently go to presidents' meetings. In fact, I'm just back from 2 of them, and people have asked me about our experience because we were earlier than most schools, and we came to a resolution that seemed satisfactory to everyone involved, or most people involved. And I was really very, very happy to have this as an example. So tonight, my hope is that we will examine where we're going to go from here. We will continue the discussion about how we can make equity, how we can make inclusion baked into the culture of the University of Oregon. Now, first and foremost, I want to thank the original members of the Black Student Task Force who brought this issue to my attention, worked tenaciously with us. Yvette, who had ran most of these committees and work groups, but really worked so hard in partnership with us over a period that extended beyond a year, is now into the second year, educated themselves in all of the issues, and helped us really make tremendous progress. Now, are there any members of the original task force that are here tonight? So, no, I don't see anybody here. But, you know, and as Yvette said, some of the folks are going to be graduating or have graduated already and gone on. I also want to thank one other group of people, Marcia Weisiger, our own professor, David Allen Johnson, and Quintard Taylor, who engaged in exhaustive research to help guide us, and members of the President's Diversity Advisory Community Council, called PDAC, or who offered their advice and counsel, and also the many other people here who were engaged in the process. I also want to acknowledge the hard work of those who helped us organize this event. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. Now, let me get on to the introductions. So we have a panel of 3 great people up here. I know them all quite well, although one of them is brand new to our community, and I'm getting to know him very well. First, let me start with Dante James, to my left, Director of the Portland Office of Equity and Human Rights. Dante is a member of our Diversity Advisory Community Council and is someone who has given me advice throughout the process of the name issue with regard to Dee and with regard to Dunn, as well as in other areas. Curtis Austin, I'll go in order. Brianna Hayes, a University of Oregon senior, a Black Student Task Force member, a leader with the Black Student Union, and a member of the committee that recommended to me that we rename Dunn Hall Unthank Hall. And then Curtis Austin. Curtis is an associate professor of history at the University of Oregon. He joined us just over summer or fall? When did you arrive? Summer, okay. So he was able to get some of that nice Oregon weather before getting this. And Curtis, though, before he arrived here, my first meeting with Curtis was over the telephone. He served on the committee to rename Dunn, and the committee that came up with the name Unthank. And we're really very grateful. It showed tremendous commitment. You're probably still on the payroll of Ohio State, and so I should probably call the president and thank him, but maybe I won't. But in any event, so why don't we get started, and I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves in a little more detail, and then talk a little bit about the issue. I'll ask some questions, and then I'm going to open it up, so be thinking about the questions that I'm not covering. All right? Go ahead. Let's start with Dante.
Thank you. Good evening. It is truly my pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation from Nadine and from Yvette. And I'm really glad to see all of the students here. I didn't want to talk to a bunch of old folks who just work at the university. So I really appreciate seeing the students here. Me, the short version, I currently work for the mayor. I run the city's Office of Equity and Human Rights, where our focus is addressing issues of institutional racism and institutional ableism. So the short answer of what I'm supposed to do is make culture change happen in the city of Portland. Good luck with that. And so I'm a recovering attorney. I've worked for politicians, for mayors, run nonprofits. I tell folks I was kind of in your seat a long time ago. I led the sit-in in the president's office at the university where I went. I tell folks I was a community organizer before Obama made it cool. And so just a variety of things that I've done. I guess if you look at my resume, it looks like I can't keep a job. But all throughout this has been about social justice and about ensuring that the folks whose voices are often not heard because they're not in the room need to be heard and need to be in the room. Because, the saying, if you're not at the table, you're usually on the menu. Mm-hmm. And so how do we ensure that we're in the room and at the table? Right. Authentically at the table. Because we get invited all kind of places. But if nobody's listening and you have no authority, don't come to the room. And so that's really, I appreciate the work that the task force did. I appreciate the process that the president put together to reach these conclusions. So I'll stop talking, but I just really do appreciate being here.
Brianna?
Good evening. My name is Brianna Hayes. I am a senior here at the University of Oregon. I'm a double major in political science and philosophy. I serve as one of the co-directors for Black Student Union. I'm a leader on the Black Student Task Force, and I also do various things on campus. So I'm around. I had the honor of serving on this committee and engaging with all the participants, and it was an amazing process, and I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Curtis Austin. I'm a new faculty member here in the Department of History. I teach the history of the Black freedom struggle, civil rights movement, Black Power movement. My first book was on, it was a history of the Black Panther Party, kind of a national history of that organization. And I too have at one point been a student activist. Today I consider myself a scholar activist, someone who not only teaches and does the research, but who tries to take, what I learned from a book or from my students in the classroom and apply it practically in my own experience in my community. And so I was really thrilled and certainly honored when I got the call to serve on this committee. As a historian, I was fascinated by the history of Oregon and also the history of the University of Oregon, and learning so much from so many capable people. Just like the president said, I hadn't been hired yet, actually. And it just made me want to come, despite some of the things that were not so pretty. But this is a beautiful state. The people here are beautiful, and I want to come and contribute in any way I can in terms of what the brother was saying about social justice. So that's just a little bit about me.
Okay, I'm going to start the first question. I'm going to ask Brianna to start us out, but let me just invite you all, if you'd like to sit. There's a bunch of seats up here, and then there's some seats over there, or you can stay by the brownies and the cookies, your choice. So, Brianna, let me ask you a question. What is changing the name of the building, in this case Dunn, to Unthank Hall? What does that represent to you? How do you view something like that? How important is that to you?
It's extremely important as a student, understanding where I am welcomed. So as a Black student, understanding where I'm welcomed on campus has a lot to do with the symbolism, that being within the name. So the change really emphasized that the climate at the University of Oregon is becoming more inclusive. Our culture is becoming more inclusive, but not forgetting that a lot of those efforts are constantly on the backs of Black students. But this year and the following, or not the following, but the prior year, what has been so significant are the efforts that have been put forth. Because as our panel, or not panel, but our committee had started out, there was a lot of conversation about how this process has been tried before, but it never succeeded. So it's just nice to be here and finally know that some sort of change is actually happening.
So Curtis, you weren't here during the process, but how do you sort of see, I don't know whether Ohio State had anything like this, but when you look from, if you will, from an outside perspective at what happened here, how do you see the importance of building names and changing building names and the sort of process that we went through to get there?
Well, I think it's extremely important, and really glad that the university responded in the way that it did. And you're right, that hadn't happened at Ohio State for a very long time, right? Some decades ago, nothing very recent. But it's this naming and denaming. This is very serious, and it's very important, because I can tell you that just as a historian, history is just not just about the past. You really can't understand what's going on around you unless you can learn from the past. So it'd be very, unreasonable. I think most of us would agree that it would be unreasonable for the university to receive, millions of dollars from Harvey Weinstein and name a female dorm after him just because they gave him some money, right? That people would think that was unreasonable. And in the same way that would be unreasonable, when you look at what we were attempting to do, in fact, what we did with the renaming, it shows that we learned. And because this is a university, an institution of higher learning, and that's what we're all here to do, faculty and students and staff as well, we're learning from our past, coming to grips with it, not pretending it never happened. And I think that shows the type of courage that, quite frankly, a lot of institutions don't have. That's why I'm glad to have been a part of it and glad to be a part of the university today.
And Dante, you were on PDEC during the period where we did this, and you were actually giving me your advice as we went along. But I never asked you, as a member of our community, a community of Oregon, and also a member of our advisory council, how did you feel about the process, not the way we did the process, but the transformational impact of changing a name? Because some people would just say, oh, it's just changing a name, right? That shouldn't matter so much. And we did get responses like that. But how did you feel about it? How do you feel about it?
That it was, as Dr. Austin said, it's important to recognize and acknowledge the symbols, what they mean, where they came from, and that these symbols were based on the philosophy that this country was founded on, which was explicit and implicit white supremacy. And so at some point, being able to acknowledge that, recognize that in order to demonstrate a responsibility to the students, to all students, specifically here black students, it was a listening exercise. And so for me, I appreciated the fact that there was a listening exercise happening on the part of the university. It's symbolic, yes. Symbols mean something. That's why they represent, the flag is just a piece of cloth. The fact that the clause in the Oregon Constitution that said black folks can't live in the state wasn't removed until 2002 was symbolic to remove it, but it needed to go. And so, I think it's a question of acknowledging that history, but it was a demonstration of listening that I really appreciated, that the university was willing to demonstrate their willingness to just to hear something in a different way.
So, from my perspective as a participant in this, the thing that and as someone who wasn't, viscerally impacted by having those names, right? Because I'm not African American. I didn't have the same feelings walking into those buildings. But one of the things that I was most happy with as we moved through the process, in addition to getting to know the students and making progress on all the ideas that they had, was the education that came about. And I think it's related to what you said. So it wasn't just about changing the name of one building, but it was a learning process. I had so many people come up to me and say, I never knew that Oregon was like this. I always thought Oregon was, a bunch of, I got to watch out what I say, but, craft beer, aging hippies, people with beards, voting liberal democratic, and yet there was this horribly underbelly to Oregon and a way for us to learn. And it's not just was, but exists in various parts of the state even now, and maybe existing parts of our community. And so it was this educational aspect that I thought was very valuable, which then leads me to ask you the next question, which is, so we've now engaged through the historian's report in this really terrific 35 pages talking about the racism in the state, talking about how even one of the people who we would consider to be one of the founders of the University of Oregon was a racist. It was pretty clear in his writings and in some of his actions. But we've gone through that period of education. Do we stop now? Do we continue? As I said a moment ago, I picked up the Emerald and I saw we have now building Hawthorne, which involves, is named after someone who owned slaves, was in the, or whose father owned slaves and was in the Civil War on the part of the South. So then, do we go systematically? Should we go systematically through all of our buildings, or should we focus on other things? And I mean, I think it's a hard question for me to think through whether that's what we should be focusing on, or should we be focusing on the Black Cultural Center? Should we be focusing on changing our curriculum? I mean, you can chew gum and walk at the same time, but it's sort of very consuming in terms of resources and attention. Curtis, what do you think?
Oh, well, I think absolutely. I think if we want to be better as a state, as an institution of higher learning, that we have to chew gum and walk. You know, I don't think that it serves anybody to be moderate in the cause of social justice or lukewarm. And just because something costs a lot of money or takes a lot of time, or, I mean, for the students, might get you in trouble, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Most of the change that we've seen happened in this country from the 19th century on, and particularly in the 1960s, but from way back, happens because people make demands and they don't back down from those demands. They are very unpopular in the moment. But then we 10, 5, 20, 30, 50 years later hold them up as heroes. So I think absolutely, regardless of what it takes in terms of time, in terms of effort, that if we're going to be who we say we are, when you read the mission, the university, then you've got to put out the energy and the resources to, you know, to be that. You don't just become it because you write it, you know.
Brianna, how do you think about it?
Well, I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but to contribute some perspective, I think it's important to consider where we draw the line. So if we continue to let buildings that have such a historical racist history associated with it maintain on this campus, how do we consider our Black students? How do we consider our underrepresented students? It's such a tough understanding with DD not being renamed, but having Dunn renamed. Though the history and the research was so thorough, it still doesn't answer the question of what about the Black students. So the survey may have contributed and engaged all of the community, but the question that wasn't asked is what about the Black students? So we do need to continue. The work does not end. We have to keep pushing forward and living up to what our mission does say.
So what Brianna was suggesting is we had a survey, we had 1,000, we put the historian's report online, we had 1,000 people respond, and, you know, Dunn, the vast majority were in favor, their view was it should be denamed, which I think we started a new word, and DD was pretty split, I would say, students being more likely to want it denamed, alumni and faculty maybe less likely, but it was close on both. Dante, how do you think, do you think it makes sense to, as again, draw the line at some point and say, you know, let's move on to other things that are that involve the same types of issues, or should we continue to be talking about denaming? Should we continue to be searching through our history?
I go back and forth, quite honestly, because on some level, fighting for symbols doesn't get us anywhere. On the other hand, as I said, the symbols mean something. So what I would suggest is that you cannot unring this bell now. The university can't unknow what it knows. And so it's not a question the university should ask of the students. It's a question that the university should ask of itself. And it already knows the answer, I think, that continuing to maintain a legacy and require students to walk through a building that would probably have gotten them killed in the past is untenable. That said, I would expect that the other more concrete things are still happening. I expect the students not to have to fight for symbols, but have to, and shouldn't have to fight for the real things, but be able to now focus on more concrete results and outcomes that they can ask for, such as the student union, the Black Student Union, that kind of thing. So for me, it's a struggle, but I think it's not appropriate for now the university to then ask the students, should it be named? Because the university already, you can't unknow what you know. not sure I answered your question, but.
No, I think it's, I do think it's an interesting question. It's a tough question. And again, I don't want to prejudge Hawthorne because all I know is I thought it was a great article, though it was very thorough. But we need to look into it. So let's talk a little bit about DeNorville Unthank, since that's one of the things we're celebrating right now. Is now we named the building after DeNorville Unthank. He was one of our graduates, a terrific member of this community, an architect, distinguished, someone who people had wonderful things to say about, and a number of things were in the report that came to me. What would if you were thinking about the number one factor, and I'll shoot this to Curtis and Brianna since you weren't on the committee at the time, what would the number one factor that came into your mind that led you to think that DeNorville Unthank should be the person, or should at least come to me as one of the names from your committee that we should consider in honoring and being honored by having his name on the building? Why don't we start with Brianna?
For DeNorville Unthank Jr., one of the most important things that stood out is the fact that he had tangible perseverance. So the fact that he was one of the first Black students to graduate from the architecture school and then go on to build Mackenzie and then expand his work throughout the Eugene community, and his connection with Portland, his family, the Unthank family at whole. I am a Portland native, so Unthank is very important to me. You meet any Black student who is from Portland, they'll be familiar with Unthank. So it's that sense of welcoming, it's the sense of inclusion that made him stand out so significantly. The Unthanks, they have a very, very huge impact on Black students, and furthermore, the community of the University of Oregon.
Again, I was learning a lot during this process, and so I didn't know very much at all about the Unthank family or Unthank Jr. in particular. And he began to far outpace the other candidates, and it really, before we made the recommendation, was obvious that the majority of the committee, including myself, thought that this would be the best person. And the thing that stood out for me was his inclusiveness, the actions that he took in terms of building these buildings, not just here, but in Portland as well, and doing a whole lot of other things in his spare time, where he reached out in the community and kind of pulled people along who might not have been able to do much more for themselves. And so when I juxtapose the person whose name was already on the building, which from what I've been able to tell was very exclusionary, to the person the building was going to be renamed for, and this person was extremely inclusive in his thoughts and actions, thought that would be the most appropriate thing. So sort of the difference between night and day, really.
Mm-hmm. So as we went about the process of thinking about what to do with the naming and actually the denaming, one of the things we did was we developed a set of criteria, a set of questions, criteria, and then in the report that I wrote about the decision, both the decision to take the name off Dunn and then the decision not to take the name off of D.D. Hall, I set up a set of standards and sort of abstract principles and then tried to apply them to the facts. Do you think that was important, or do you think, and you don't try to make my feelings feel good. I'm really interested in what you think. I mean, was that an important way or a useful way of going about it, or should we have looked for consensus alone, or should we have looked at only the interests? And Brianna, you I don't know whether you suggested this, but should the views of the Black students been either predominant or exclusive with regard to that? You didn't say that, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but, you know, how do you go, I mean, how do you assess how we went about making, I'll take responsibility, how I went about making the ultimate decision? You want to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, for the first go-round with denaming Dunn, I think that the criteria served as an excellent way to not make one candidate less than the other, but to show why each of them would stand out. But it really just drew you to who was going to serve the best purpose. So I don't have an answer as far as how to weigh the criteria, but I think that it does need to be taken into consideration because that is the driving force behind renaming these buildings, are the Black students and the students that are constantly kept out. So in the future, possibly yes.
What do you think, Dante?
I actually appreciated the criteria. I thought that they were reasonable, they were realistic. You know, I'm certainly not going to be surprised that somebody from the 1860s was a bigot. And so, you know, you could spend all your time going through every name on this campus and find, I'm guessing, some level of bigotry in the family somewhere. Somebody owns somebody. So, I mean, I think the criteria was important. You know, do we consensus? No, I don't think. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the majority ruling because that would have kept me on the back of the bus. So I think there needs to be some realistic criteria. My short answer is I did appreciate the criteria that you put together.
Curtis? Let me ask you a question. Let me add on another question. One of the things that I kept hearing over and over again, because this was, for all of us who lived here, this was something everybody got into. I mean, every dinner I had, this came up as a question. The register guard was full of letters from people I'd never heard of before, which is actually pretty par for the course, and, you know, about the University of Oregon, about what we were doing. And, you know, one of the arguments that frequently came is you can't judge someone today, you can't judge someone who lived in 1850s, 1860s by the standards of today. That's not right, that's not fair, et cetera, et cetera. How do you, as a historian, think about that, particularly with respect to the name of the building?
Well, I mean, if you can judge people however you want to judge them, I think. It doesn't really matter if you're being judgmental. I mean, you don't have to put that in a time capsule. But at the same time, I believe that if we're trying to be objective, and that's what we're taught to do as historians anyway, when you look at the time period, you can judge them by the standards of that time period and still find them wanting. Fairness doesn't have, you know, an expiration date. What's fair in 1776 is fair today. You know, that part actually does not change. The rules, the laws, the policies change, but treating people with dignity, that doesn't really, you can do that in 1776. Certain people got treated with quite a bit of dignity. So if we're human beings and we're saying that all of us are equal, and that is what we were saying, then there are things that we have to do to make that the case. So I get that quite a lot in my history classes, so it's a perfectly good, perfectly legitimate question. And I tell my students exactly what I've said here. Like, if you're the one doing the judging, go ahead and judge. A lot of times people try to take us off the point that's important, try to get us off the subject by saying, well, what about this and what about the other thing, and not really dealing with the issue. And the issue is about inclusion. The issue is about justice. The issue is about equity, and not some of the other things that we try to throw in to confuse the issue. And I would just submit to you that time period doesn't matter when it comes to big ideas like this, so that women were treated a certain way when this country first started. That doesn't make it right. We can't say, well, it was right then that they got treated that way just because everybody did it. It wasn't right then, and it's not right today. So I would take issue with people who say you can't do that. I'd find it very easy to do that.
Okay.
That's why you got hired.
So let me ask you another question. So that was a hard question, and then here's another one, which again you may not find as hard, maybe clear to you, but as we move forward with thinking about this, there was always a question in the back of my mind about public opinion. Ultimately, it didn't. I don't think it had anything to do with my decision, but if there was, if we thought as we were moving forward that the general thrust or purpose of what we were trying to achieve, which was to do all sorts of inclusionary programs and practices, increase inclusion on campus. Some of this would require the community to participate, some of it would require our alumni community to contribute towards that and really make lasting change that was significant for our students. And if we were to go down a road where we were to take the name off of a building and it would lead to sort of a division among the people that we needed to support us and make possible the change, is it just so absolutely clear there's a right, because I'm going on top of your point, which is there's a right thing and a wrong thing, but is it ever true that it might be right to take the name off of a building, but it might be counterproductive to achieve the lasting change that you're trying to accomplish?
Oh, yeah, I think it's almost always true.
It's always true.
But that should not stop us. I mean, I think I get where you're coming from. So you just tell me if I got this right. That maybe some alumni or some big-time supporter may withdraw support if we went the route that we thought was best for the students and the faculty and the staff. Is that where you're going?
Well, I don't know what best is. So, I mean, that's what I'm trying to explore. What is best? Is best to say we're going to take a name off of a building, or is best to have a tremendous amount of support to be doing other things on campus that will help those students achieve their objectives, whether it's scholarships, whether it's, buildings, whether it's something else?
Well, I mean, a university is in the business of teaching and training students. So if you have someone who's saying, I can help you teach and train these students, but you have to leave this racist name on this building, then, I know it's easy for me to say because you're the president, but I mean, I don't want your money if that's the deal. Mm-hmm. We can actually figure out how to teach and train students without your money. And maybe your money will help us to teach and train more students. Maybe it would, but I mean, we are really muddying the water by saying we're okay with that name staying up there because now we're going to get this $5, $10, $20 million deal. I don't think you make those kinds of deals and expect to have the type of environment that you're saying you want on campus.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask, and I should say, that was purely hypothetical. There's nothing like nothing like that happened. Okay. I mean, it's actually to the credit, I think, of our alumni. No one tried to strong arm me, and I was expecting that something like that could happen, and nothing happened. But it's nice to talk about it in an environment where it's not happening. Dante?
I absolutely agree. I mean, essentially, I think what I hear you asking is a political question. The politics of money, the politics of who's going to be feeling harmed or who's too sensitive to deal with this. If we're going to do racial equity work, we have to do it unapologetically and courageously. It's as simple as that. And so that is going to create dissension on the part of the folks who wanted to keep the statutory language in Oregon's Constitution. Because it had historical value. Okay, the history didn't apply to them. So you're gonna have that dissension. But if we do this work authentically, courageously, and unapologetically, then we just do it.
Brianna, how do you look at it?
I also agree. It's unfortunate if someone were to withdraw their support because they don't want to take this moment in time to be educated. Though there are people saying that you cannot judge someone from that time in history with 2017 standards, we have to consider the long-lasting implications that they have. So the culture that has been carried out, racist culture that has been carried out through symbols. So we have to keep pushing forward.
See, this issue, I think, as I was thinking about it, is came most to the front, I think, in my mind with the school I went to, which is Princeton. Woodrow Wilson, as all of us remember, Woodrow Wilson was implicated as being racist, and should they take off the name of Woodrow Wilson from the Woodrow Wilson School, Wilson College, Wilson this, Wilson that, and it always seemed to me that at the end of the day, it was pretty clear that they weren't going to be taking it off, both for a variety of reasons. And they did take it off of one program or one building. I have one more question, then I'm going to open it up to the audience because Angela's saying, audience. This is for Brianna. So was this your first university committee that you had served on?
Yes.
So you were on a committee with, I'm trying to think of all the members. You have a high-powered historian who you never even met, but know was going to come here and know you might take a class from him at some point. Who else was on this committee? I'm trying to remember. Angela?
Jaria Martin.
Yeah.
Kenna?
Greg Evans.
Yeah, we're Councilman Evans. So pardon me? I'm sorry? Okay, yeah, all right. So, if you participated in this, how did it feel to participate? How did it? Did you feel totally empowered? And did you feel that? Would you recommend that other students engage in similar types of committees?
I would say other students, if they have the opportunity, definitely should engage in committees like this. But I think one thing that does get mixed up with college and student activism is that it's kind of trendy. So when Black students come here, you do have a lot of opportunity to engage and participate and create a lot of change on your campus. But one thing about Black Student Task Force is that it specifically works to fight anything that is anti-Black. So that particular work cannot necessarily be an aid to all because not everyone is dealing with anti-Blackness. So with that being said, for other students who face other issues, they have to be mindful. Not all of us are going to have the same tactics, mechanisms, or concentrations. We have to make sure that we're not generalizing the same issues. So if you do participate on a committee or if you do want to create change, do it for the right reasons, because as a Black student, this isn't the first time that I've had to fight for equity. I've been doing it long before this, and it will continue after college. So just to be mindful.
Okay, said well. All right, audience, who has a question?
I'll do it.
All right. Once one starts, we know we're getting more.
Yes. Get bonus points for going first. Hi.
Another new professor at the university. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Beck Thompson. I'm a professor of political science. I am also new.
Do you want to do them on the mic so we can all hear you?
Okay, so my question is for the entire panel, but specifically Curtis, 'cause I'm gonna pick on you. What do we make of this moment when Georgetown has offered reparations in the form of free tuition for the descendants of the slaves who were sold? and where Princeton is reconsidering naming the Woodrow Wilson School, and where Yale has launched a $1 million project into Yale's specific history with slavery, and where universities across the country are coming to terms with the ways in which their wealth has been built fundamentally through the exploitation of black labor. What do we make, I'm a political scientist, so I'm a historian of your future, right? So like, what do we make of this moment? What do we make of this moment? What will the future historians say catalyze this moment? And how long do you think this window of opportunity is going to be open for? Do you think this is everlasting change, or do you feel like this is fleeting?
Oh, I definitely don't think it's fleeting. I think with the work done by students like Brianna and all the other students who took part, and I should just say that in addition to the renaming of the building, the reason that I'm here along with Professor Alexander, who's over in the audience, is because the students demanded a Black Studies program, and the university responded. So I dare not say that this is fleeting. I mean, as long as students are students, I think we're going to see change being made. But this moment, when you talk about the reparations, when you talk about the changes, I think historians will look back and see that this is something that we were trying to make good on a promise. We were trying to make good, this country, these institutions was trying to make good on a promise, but we the people, have to make sure that those changes are meaningful, right? So it makes a huge difference when you say, all right, we're going to bring somebody in to have a Black Studies program, and you bring those people in, you bring myself, Deb, Professor Alexander, and several other people who are not here tonight. There's a big difference between doing that, bringing people here to teach classes, and then putting resources, human and financial resources, behind something that would be long-lasting, long after we are gone, long after these students are gone. So hiring, I mean, a university hires faculty all the time. This is not new, it's not revolutionary, it's the way things go. But if the university decides, if the University of Oregon decides that we really want a Black Studies program that is comprehensive and is not just this small thing that serves, Black students, then that's where we see the real change being made. Because the fact of the matter is that really the last group of people who need Black Studies is Black people. It's white people need Black Studies. And there's quite a few white people here at the University of Oregon. So that if we're actually going to be about serving the students, we have to put, again, the human and financial resources behind the words and the often perfunctory actions that we go to make people think that we're serious. And so I think to answer, to finish answering your question, once we see other universities follow in those footsteps, once we see the University of Oregon continue to build on the tremendous changes, and like I said earlier, the courageous changes that it's already made, then this moment will be much more than something that might be considered fleeting.
I feel that Deb was like a shill because he was looking at me during his answer rather than you. But it's appropriate that you be the shill. In this case, how do you see it, Dante? This moment that we're in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, specifically around resources. And I mean, you've hired Black faculty, there's a Black Studies department. Okay, so the moment is here, but it becomes a movement if and when there are resources put behind education and professional development for the folks that you're hiring. And how are you maintaining budget for the Black Student Union? How are you maintaining budget for the Black Studies program? How are you providing professional development and retention opportunities and support for the faculty that you're bringing in here? That's a movement. Otherwise, it's just a moment because they're going to be gone in a couple of years because it just isn't the place to be. So all of that will make it a long-term movement as opposed to just the moment that we're glad you're here. Everybody, when I got here, people said, well, I hope you stay, right? You know, and so that's, I know that's what everybody here is saying. We hope you stay, because the students are going to be gone. So this movement here from these students will be gone. So the institutional memory of that disappears, and so what continues to maintain it is the real question.
So abstract out from Deb's question, go further thinking about not just the university and our university, but the moment in time that we're at, right? With the Black Lives Matter movement, with this happening really all across the country. Do you see, when you go to sleep at night, are you optimistic about where all of this ends, that this is going to be progress that will be lasting? So it's not just posing the question, but how do you see the moment that we're living in right now?
If I wasn't optimistic, I couldn't do this work. That said, I think this is a movement because it's never ended. Since we've started this before the 60s and the civil rights, I mean, it's continuing. It has its ebbs and flows. You know, it's just a roller coaster. And right now, we were tired of being at the bottom of the curve, so now we're saying enough is enough, and so we're expecting to be at the top. And I think that will last a good while, because social media has made it unable to not see what happens to folks in the Black community. So the more that continues, there's no way to remove oneself from being angry. You know, I get angry, I get tired, all those things. But at the end of the day, I go to work and I'm tired and I see someone that just pisses me off and now I'm upset and I'm ready to go again. So I just think that it will continue, and I have to be optimistic about the changes.
Brianna, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just that it has to continue. I don't think we have a choice at this point. That's all.
Additional questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark Harris. I've taught ethnic studies here, a Black history of Eugene. There have been Black people here since before the state began, and I'm also an addictions counselor and Black psychologist. So for me, you know, Black studies is not just for everyone, but definitely for the health of Black people. They need to understand their history. And one of the things that I liked about Dee in consulting with elders in the Black community about, okay, Dee was also a civil rights activist. And one of the things about being a civil rights activist is you basically show excellence in the face of racism. And not only are you a student activist and an excellent student, but your activism flows out of your scholarship. And so when I use part of, you know, the university report and also a report from a historian of the Human Rights Commission by a Black police captain, and when I also interview Black folks about their experience of the Ku Klux Klan, they can't agree that the Klan died in 1925. Police, intelligence communities, and the experience of the Black community doesn't indicate that the Klan died in 1925, like that report suggests. I understand why they might have said that, but that is not our lived experience. I came from a meeting yesterday at LCC in which the Klan is organizing in one of our departments, and that's probably likely here. Klans don't just fade away like, you know, a trend. They, you know, come back, especially if they have inspiration from the White House. And they've been coming out of the woodwork. So I guess the question in terms of the relevance of not only an expansive and inclusive history is how do you sustain that personally? Because oftentimes we get burnt out in the struggle.
Who wants to take that?
How do you sustain the work that you do around these various issues, you mean?
Well, I've been here 30 years. Constantly think, should I leave? Go someplace else where there isn't the struggle, where I don't have to keep fighting this battle.
But I would suggest you don't do it for you. You do it for everybody else who looks like you, which is why you keep doing it. And that's why we need you to keep doing it. So much respect. I mean, that's the hard part, because sometimes folks don't know you're doing it for them. But you know you're doing it for them. That's, at least that's my mindset anyway. I know who I'm doing it for. I'm doing it for my son. I'm doing it for my son's son who isn't born yet. I'm doing it for my great-grandfather who was a slave. I do it for everybody outside of me. That's the only thing I can stand on. Otherwise, I'm just really tired.
Beth?
So two questions. President Schill, you mentioned earlier on that the University of Oregon was sort of out front on these issues. And you're often talking with presidents and others in higher education. What's the conversation like in terms of this particular area of work and where universities are going with respect to that issue? And for the panel, if you can share a bit about this work in terms of the ecosystem of support to maintain it. So we talk about the fact that this is not a fleeting moment. But we also talk about the fact that students were at the vanguard of this effort, and many of them have graduated. Brianna's graduating this year, and members of the task force, are continuing to rotate. The truth is, obviously, we can't continue to lead these movements on the back of students. So what is that ecosystem of support, including those invisible forces that are very active right now and have been through this movement that we're not really naming and that are not a part of this conversation that we might make visible as part of the conversation tonight as well?
So I'll take the first part. So 2.5 years ago, when I became president and started attending these meetings of presidents, was just as the Missouri, as the problem in Missouri occurred, when the president was fired, the chancellor was fired as a result of the protest. And I think that really was a wake-up call to presidents in the universities, then that this became a very high priority issue. I mean, I think among presidents it was always an issue, and I mean this, meaning increasing opportunities for African American students to feel comfortable, to feel included, to feel a part of the university. And so I think that became very, very high up on the agenda. I still think it is high up, but what we're seeing now is actually how do we protect them? So it's changed a little bit with Richard Spencer in Charlottesville, and it shifted a little bit is how do we protect, the number one issue that we're talking about is in this area is how do we protect our students from these forces on the outside who are trying to come in and use universities and use our students as pawns in a bigger game. And so that is changed. It's still thinking about the same types of issues, but it's sort of shifted the emphasis. And also, quite honestly, one of the things that has focused a lot of attention among presidents in the United States is the same sort of issue that we've been talking with on our campus lately, is the fact that, we value inclusion tremendously, we value diversity, but we also value freedom of speech. And that becomes a real, there's limits to the law in terms of what one can do to keep these folks out. And there's also the view that we believe in freedom of speech, and we believe that people should be able to talk to people. Now, the white supremacists coming on, no one wants that. But at the same time, there is this dynamic, and there is Supreme Court law that makes it very difficult. So that's how that's changed a little bit. I actually would much prefer to be where we were 2 years ago, thinking about how we can make it better on campus for our African American students, rather than thinking about, oh my God, what's going to happen when Richard Spencer shows up here? How do we keep everybody safe? That to me is not progress. That to me is defense. And I'd much rather be offense and thinking about how can we build a great Black cultural center? How can we increase Black student success? How can we really make this a better school for all of our students, most particularly one of our smallest minority groups on campus? But now, what was your second question, so we can refocus? The ecosystem.
Well, I would just say that the university has to show the community, the campus community and the larger community, that it is in fact serious about taking us to the places that has just been described. And so I know that the university is now in the process of raising money for a Black cultural center. That's a huge step forward. I don't think we can stop at a place like that. We need to provide students opportunities that are not just in political science and history. And we need to provide students who are in the sciences and engineering. I know we don't have a medical school, but we do study medicine on this campus and healthcare on this campus, and so we can't just keep it over in the arts and sciences or the social sciences. It's got to permeate the entire campus, and what that means is taking people who are already doing that kind of work and supporting them in whatever ways they need it, hiring people who can come in and do the kind of work that needs to be done, and providing the kind of leadership that any endeavor needs. I mean, the university, not just the University of Oregon, but universities all across this country never have a problem recruiting Black athletes. You know, they can find a Black athlete, but then when you open the conversation about Black students, well, we don't know where they are. Well, they live next door to the Black athletes. You know, that's where they are. And you put in the same kind of resources and effort there that you would for the football team. And I know that's kind of a hot button issue, but it's actually quite true that we make excuses when it's something that we don't want to do. We always say, we don't know about how do you do that? Well, you do it the same way you do this other thing over here. So I believe that making sure that folks are being serious, and that means pressure from the students. That means the faculty have to stand up and not be afraid of not getting tenure, not getting promoted, not being liked, because teacher evaluations are very important. And if you say things that are controversial, you might not get a good evaluation. I mean, you could, but there's a chance that you will not. And the university has to understand when that's happening, whether it's with the person of color, whether it especially happens with women all the time. I mean, male students say all kinds of crazy stuff about our, female faculty just because they're female. And so the university has to support those faculty members and those staff people who are dealing with these kinds of issues, and not just say, we're for gender equity, not just say we're for racial inclusion, but actually be a beacon of light and show people this is what we're doing about that problem. And sometimes you're going to fail. Sometimes whatever strategy, whatever tactic you use, it's just not going to work. I mean, we're human, we're fallible. Well, we have to try something different after that. And what usually happens is, oh, well, we tried that, and now we're going to go back to business as usual. No, there's a song and a saying in the civil rights movement that says, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. And what what they're saying when they say that is, it's not going to be easy, right? It's certainly not going to be cheap. And it's going to take far more time than any of us realize, and so it won't be a short road. It took us a long time to get to where we are, and we're not going to fix it by the next quarter, and we're not going to fix it by the next year. And so we need to find people who have that kind of long-term commitment, who won't be afraid that you're going to leave just because you run into something ugly. You're going to run into something ugly. I mean, you're in the United States of America, all right? Malcolm X said, anywhere south of the Canadian border is south. And I have lived and worked all over the United States, from the Northeast, the Midwest, the Deep South, and now in the Far West. And I can tell you there is zero difference. I mean, they say it in a different accent, and it happens in a different climate. It's wet over here, and it's cold over there, and it's hot down there. But it's the same thing, and so we can't pretend that, well, we're going to try this thing, and if it doesn't work, at least we tried. No, it's going to be very difficult, and there are going to be some disappointments, and some people are going to be hurt. I don't mean physically hurt, but you're not going to get what you want. I'm not going to get what I want when I want it. But we have to work through all of that if we have the goal that we're being serious about, and that is equity and inclusion. And we're going to have to struggle for that.
Brianna, let me take part of Yvette's question, and she was saying, this which shouldn't be on the backs of the students to be doing a lot of, or most of the work. I think that's a somewhat accurate version of what you said. I want to flip it just a little bit. Would you want it not to be on your backs? I mean, part of my, and this is actually a real question. I have no idea what you're going to say right now. But if we were to sort of say, okay, Yvette's going to take it over, and I'm going to take it over, and we're going to start charting the course for enhancing the opportunities here, would you be like, okay, great, go do it? Or would you say, no, we want to be involved. We want to actually be doing the work?
I think when we speak about Black students having this burden on their back, that we're not talking about it and saying that we don't want to be involved. We're saying that the emotional labor that goes into this really takes away from your student experience. I'll just speak from a personal experience. I'm doing my undergraduate studies in 3 years, and I do not feel like a student. I don't feel like a student whatsoever. I feel like I've had to work 10 times harder to access support, and I have a ton of support, but I know that other Black students don't have the same opportunities as me because they haven't been poured into the way I have. But it's an accommodation of effort, and I think that there needs to be more push and more recognition and more awareness on the administration and faculty for Black students to be recognized as students that need to be cared about. And I think when you bring in the whole idea of making sure that you're caring about students, that people don't really agree with it because you stray away from the facts. But I remember at the beginning of Weaving New Beginnings, Dr. Alex Asenso talked about how we're supposed to be a loving community. And we need more of it. That's all. We need more.
Yeah.
I just want to thank the students and the panelists for having the courage and persistence to keep pursuing this whole equity and diversity thing, because the burden is so much on you. And so I really appreciate how you are giving voice to all these challenges and giving ideas, sharing. Especially welcome to Dr. Austin. It's really great to have you to join our community. I'm just curious about, is there any way that we can keep the history, the ugly history specifically of Oregon, alive for all the new generations who are coming through this university? I mean, I think that we can put up little plaques and stuff, but for myself, having this kind of forum and having speakers come to our school has been really great in articulating some of the concerns of the African American community. But are there ways that every single university student could understand the dark history that's happened here are there some ways that we can make that happen?
So I'll take a first shot at that, and you know, so I think one of the things one of the demands, the original demands made by the Black Student Task Force was for Ethnic Studies 101 to be, which is the introductory course, to be required for everybody. That obviously couldn't happen because we don't have that many professors, and they'd be overrun only teaching Ethnic Studies 101. And actually, the students changed their views as to what they wanted, and more towards a Black Studies program, and that was and then Andrew Marcus, through the College of Arts and Sciences, moved in that direction, and I'm really pleased that he did, and he gets the credit for that. So I think that my own view is, and this is something that the University Senate is working on right now, is we have a multicultural requirement here. It has about, I don't know, is Bill still, it was 700 courses or something? Probably more that fill it. So you could easily go, a white student or a Black student could easily go here and not know a thing about not learn a thing about slavery, not learn a thing about discrimination. And so we are now working with the Senate to come up with a way to reform our curriculum, because I really do think, I personally feel that students should not, white and Black, should not graduate from the university without some knowledge of our history and our very, very checkered history in this area. And so I think that's the way that we can do that. We will also do things like plaques and exhibits, and Yvette is heading up a task force on that, about what that will look like here. Will involve museums. How do we make it lasting? But some of the things that we're going to be doing here are lasting. The Black Cultural Center, what we put into it, how we staff it, what the programming is, lasting, right? It's not going to go away in 1 year. How we think about, issues of the university and increasing the student body and the faculty, lasting. So all of those things are part of the way to institutionalize this. I don't know whether Curtis or Brianna or Dante have any other things to add on that, how to make sure this, you've already said quite eloquently that it's by putting resources and energy into these things that we make sure that what we say this year doesn't end.
But if I can give an example of why I think it's absolutely important and a fundamental disservice to the students and the communities where they go to not learn the history of this country or this state, its checkered history as you describe it. I work with police a lot, who obviously work with community members a lot. Most of them have no clue about the history of this state, let alone the history of this country. And so it's detrimental to them when they don't understand sometimes the reactions they get from folks because of the incidents that have occurred in the city of Portland or in the state or on my Facebook page for that matter. And so it is incumbent upon the university, I think, to make the most well-rounded individual as they go out into the world, into the workforce. Not doing that then puts them at a disadvantage. It puts the people they have to interact with at a disadvantage. And there's just so much opportunity lost, I think, to create the opportunity for better relationships and interactions. So I think it's an absolute necessity to be able to teach. Because when I do teach this history of this state and this country, people are blown away, and they grew up here. they don't have the first clue what a sundown town is or where they were. They don't have the first clue. I mean, black folks need to learn Native history, Native folks learn their, I mean, it's just a well-rounded individual that we're trying to create, and I think it's a lost opportunity if we don't do it.
I also want to say one last thing. Curtis, did you want to do you have anything you want to
Well, I would
add in?
just echo the same thing, and I really appreciate that question. But curricular reform is extremely important, and it is a huge step forward to require students to learn about who they are and where they are. And that's one of those things that will be very difficult. You say that you're working with the Senate. Now, I would imagine a lot of people in the Faculty Senate would oppose the position that I'm taking. But the fact of the matter is, we need to, it's not just the ugly history, it's history. Like, we don't need to make it up. You know, we need to talk about the good stuff. We need to talk about the stuff that's not so good and all the stuff that's in between. That is how we make progress, by coming to grips with what we've been so that we can know how to be better people. And at a university, the easiest, the best, and most reasonable way to do that is through the curriculum. I mean, people are going to come to events. Certainly programming is important, but education is never going to leave you. You'll forget about
Right.
an event. You'll forget about a speaker. But if you take a class or series of classes, and you have the type of faculty, I understand the faculty are very good here, that knows how to lay it out for you, that's something that's going to stick with you for life.
So I'm going to just throw one last tiny bit, because we have some refreshments and to eat and talk to each other. But one thing that I thought, and one of the reasons I wanted to have this event tonight, because I do think that we did something very special here over the past 2 years, and it was led by the students, and the students were really very, and a number of the students in the room today were part of the effort, just a very special effort, and showed not just a lot of energy and a lot of commitment, but also a lot of political savvy, and understanding where to push, how to push, maybe how to pull back a little bit in various ways. And it was just, I was just remarkably impressed by this. And I have to say, I'm a human being, and I respond to the sorts of good feelings and bad feelings as just like anybody else does. And when I saw the sort of cooperative behavior that we all engaged in, and the sort of striving and the willingness to think about each other as people who really want to do good, that was something that was really impressive. And we went from protest, which, as I said, was something brand new for me, to really achievement. And it really is a model that I'm proud of our students, and it was one that I had to be led to, but proud of our students. And so with the number of them in the audience today, I'd just like to thank you and give all of them a very, very special round of applause.